She whispered my name, but her mouth was sewn shut with black thread. That was no act. I held the crucifix with both hands and felt the metal burn, as if hell itself was trying to rip it from my skin. The room smelled of sulfur and dead flowers. It was the middle of the night. The woman writhed on the bed with a force that seemed to snap her bones from the inside. But the worst part was when she stopped. She opened her eyes, and she called me, with a voice that sounded exactly like my mother's, who had already passed away. My legs trembled, but I didn't back down. The candle by the bedside exploded as if blown from the inside. The sound that followed didn't belong to this world. It was an impossible language, a fusion of animal groans and church hymns played in reverse. I had faced other cases before, but never something that looked at me with such intimacy, as if it had known me before my calling, before I was even born. The priest beside me began praying in Latin, but her voice grew louder. She didn't scream. She sang, a slow, dissonant melody, with words I would only understand years later, in a dream that left me waking in tears, on my knees. She wasn't just possessed. She was a channel, and whatever spoke through her knew exactly where to strike. Since that night, there has been no silence. When I try to sleep, I hear footsteps, a soft dragging, like bare feet over wet stone. I've changed convents twice, moved cells, fasted beyond what the body should endure. But every time I close my eyes, I hear that sweet and grotesque voice calling me again. Sister, sister, he's still here. And that was only the first night. When I arrived at that house, something unsettled me before I even stepped inside. The wind was still, yet the curtain on the window trembled, as if someone were breathing behind it. The mother, pale and hollow-eyed, could barely greet me. The first thing she said was, "She hasn't slept in 5 nights, but she's not awake either." I walked toward the bedroom without letting go of my rosary. The floor creaked beneath us, like it resented our presence. When I opened the door, the smell hit me like a punch. Mold, dried blood, and something I had never smelled before, like rotting flesh soaked in old perfume. The woman sat on the edge of the bed. Her wrists were marked from struggling against the bindings. But now the body was still, and that was worse. Her eyes didn't blink. They stared at me as if they knew my name, my past, my sins. I began praying softly. It was always like this. Observe, feel, and only then strike with prayer. But the moment I began the first Our Father, the light flickered. That's when she smiled, a smile far too wide for her face. Her teeth looked like blades, and when she spoke, it wasn't with the voice of a woman. It was many, as if more than one mouth were speaking from inside her. "You're too late, sister. She's mine now." At that moment, the rosary snapped in my hand. The beads scattered across the floor like tiny bones falling. I took a deep breath. The priest hadn't arrived yet, and I was alone. I looked at the crucifix and felt it grow heavier. It was as if God was present, but distant, as if whispering to me, "You'll have to endure this one until the end." Have you ever felt the presence of something that hates you, even though it's never seen you before? I began to pray out loud. The Our Father becomes a sword when faith is real. But the response came instantly. She threw herself back with such force that the mattress sank, as if carrying the weight of an animal. And then she laughed. A continuous laugh, as if she didn't need to breathe. And while she laughed, the wardrobe opened on its own. The doors slammed against the wall. The mirrors shattered. And I heard footsteps. Inside the room, but from no one visible. She rose, still tied, as if an invisible hand were lifting her by the hair. Her feet no longer touched the ground. Then she screamed with the voice of a child, "Let go of my mom, please! I'm scared!" But seconds later, Without pause, another voice came from the same mouth. "She's not here anymore, sister. Only the shell remains." That wasn't acting. That wasn't illness. That was an entity mocking me using the victim's own emotions. I began to recite Psalm 91, the same one I had used in another exorcism months earlier. But this time, the reaction was different. She turned her head 90 degrees like a dead bird and began to sing. It was a lullaby, a soft, sweet melody, but wrong. So wrong that the words felt like they came from a place where no one should ever sing. The light bulb exploded, the window slammed shut, and then I smelled something burning. It was hair. Something had caught fire. I shouted, "By the blood of the Lamb, manifest yourself now." That's when her eyes turned completely black. No whites, no pupils, just liquid darkness pouring from her stare. And something inside me whispered, "She's going to try to deceive you." So I ask you, if you were in that room, facing a creature hiding behind a human face, would you know the difference between the victim and the invader? The priest arrived in the third hour, too late to stop what had already begun. When he entered, she was speaking in ancient Hebrew, a language she had never learned. He looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was as if he were saying, "Get ready. This one's going to cost." We began the rite. She answered each prayer with broken words, as if her tongue were lined with blades. And every time the name of Christ was spoken, something inside her trembled, but never backed down. Then came the most dangerous moment. She stopped speaking. Her body went silent. The ropes loosened. For a few seconds, the room felt normal. It was the silence before the abyss. I approached with the crucifix and she looked at me. This time, crying, she whispered with the voice of the woman she once was, "Help me. Get me out of here." But the moment I moved to touch her forehead, her mouth opened in a scream that didn't come out. It was as if the sound had been sucked back in. The bed lifted off the ground. It floated for nearly 3 seconds, then crashed down. The impact cracked the floor. The priest's Bible flew across the room and landed open on the book of Job. That was no coincidence. That was a sign. She laughed again and said, "You've lost. She's already home. I only need one more name." And I understood instantly. It wanted to leap. It wanted a new body. And in that room, there were only 3 names. Would you have the courage to stand where I stood? To know that one wrong breath might be an invitation for something to enter you? The deliverance came hours later. But even in victory, something remained. Not in her. In me. The feeling that part of that evil knows me now, watches me. Sometimes when I pray alone, I feel the same cold from that night, and I hear something repeating my name. If this gave you chills, write in the comments. I believe. And if you've lived through something similar, tell your story. I want to read it. Since that day, I never returned to that house. The woman was delivered, but something remained in that room. The priest blessed it, sealed the windows, burned incense until the smoke disappeared. But no one dares to use that space anymore. The door stays locked. And sometimes the mother writes to me saying she hears the sound of rosary beads rolling across the floor, even though all the rosaries were taken away. Other cases followed, other screams, other voices. But that name, I never heard it again. And maybe that's what scares me, not knowing if it left, or if it's just waiting. Some presences don't want to scare. They want to hide. They want to observe. And when you lower your guard, they settle where no one sees. In the folded habit, in the empty chair, in your midnight prayer. Sometimes, when I wake up at night, I get the feeling I'm not alone. The reflection in the mirror feels delayed. The crucifix on the wall swings without wind, and that smell, that same smell of rotting flesh and old perfume, returns like a vivid memory. I've thought about leaving the order. I've thought about never speaking of this again. But I know that staying silent might be exactly what he wants. Maybe the exorcism worked. Maybe it didn't. What I know is that, to this day, I can't read Psalm 91 without remembering that scream that never left. And I wonder, staring into the dark hallway before bed, what if it never fully left? Would you have the courage to sleep in that room, knowing it knows your name, and can speak with a voice you love? If you've ever felt something you couldn't explain, write it down. I'll read it. If this story gave you chills, share it with someone who never believed. And if at any moment you felt something watching you while you listened, maybe it wasn't just your imagination. Maybe this story found you for a reason.